welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles, and this is the show where we explore the riches of our Catholic faith and how it informs our daily lives. It's very good to be back. It's been a long time since I've done this, more than a year, and anyone who's been following me knows I've been busy with my work at churchmilitant.com. I've been anchoring headlines, doing the daily panel discussion on the download, and of course writing articles for the site. So it is good to be back, and I hope that I'll be able to produce more of these radio shows from time to time moving forward. But today, I welcome Nancy Bilyeau to my show. Nancy's a writer and magazine editor, and she's published a series of historical fiction titled The Crown, The Chalice, and The Tapestry. And these books are set in Reformation England between 1537 and 1541, and they're written from the perspective of a devout Catholic, Joanna Stafford. So Nancy, it's wonderful to have you here on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I am so grateful that we can have this conversation. I'm very excited. Thanks.
Sure. I had a chance to kind of look through your books a little bit, and they're very richly detailed. You obviously did a lot of, historical research, put a lot of thought into these works. But first, tell us a bit about Joanna Stafford, without giving too much away. Who is she, and then how does she end up in the court of King Henry VIII?
When I decided that I wanted to write historical fiction, I wanted to set it in the Tudor period because it's a period of time I've been drawn to since I was about 11 years old. I've always enjoyed reading fiction and nonfiction set in that time. So when I decided to write my own novels, I thought that I would want to do something a little different. There are a lot of novels that are revolving around the kings, queens, the princesses, the ladies of the court, and I just felt that had been done so often. I wanted to do this in a different way. So it came to me, what if I take a completely different perspective, that of a nun? I ended up choosing to make her a novice, but that was my first decision. I felt that no one had done this, and no one had when I published The Crown in 2012. There's been another book since then from another author. But anyway, I wanted to do something interesting, and also I thought that the Reformation and all the turmoil, the struggle and the conflict would be very interesting material. So I had to decide what kind of nun.
Right.
And I looked at all of the different orders, and I decided to make her a member of the Dominican order. I did a lot of research between the Benedictines, the Cistercians, the Dominicans. I chose the Dominicans because during this time in the 16th century, they're a very intellectual order, a very selfless order, and the Dominican priory that existed at that time in Dartford, which is a bit south of London, was a fascinating place filled with women who were not driven there because they couldn't get married or they were forced there. From all of my research, they were women who wanted to be there and who were very dedicated to prayer, to singing, to gardening, and also to study, to reading, to all sorts of interesting activities. And the prioresses were very intelligent and driven, and they were landowners, and it was just a whole world opened up to me the more research I did. So then I decided that my character, I made her a novice, and I made her from an aristocratic background because that was consistent with the time. Some were aristocratic, some were what we would call now middle class. You had to bring a little money into the religious order, so it was usually someone who had to have a family with some means. And so then I also made her a Stafford, which is a real family. If anyone has enjoyed the play Richard III, you know about the Duke of Buckingham. He was a Stafford. They were a family that were, through multiple generations, produced Dukes of Buckingham who were always either killed in battle or executed by the rival king. So I found them a very almost doomed family, but a very interesting and ambitious family. That's pretty much died out after the Tudor era. You didn't hear much from them anymore. So I created a woman whose father was a Stafford and her mother was a Spanish maid of honor to Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII, who's venerated to this day. And I made her very pious, but also I I made her very bold, headstrong, driven toward a life of religious sacrifice and thought, but also determined to find the truth. Just a very strong person. And that was important to me, too. I didn't want her to be one of these damaged nuns, which you see in fiction. I wanted her to be a person who made a choice. So this is my journey. And then I came up with Joanna Stafford. And each of the books is written in the first person. Through her eyes, you see everything that happens. So I had to be very deliberate in my choice and building her character, because I was going to have to live with her through many books.
Right. Wow. Well, you clearly put a great deal of thought and research into this. Now, this time period has always been fascinating to me as well. And there's a saying that history is written very much by the winners. And Catholics were very much the losers in Reformation England, considering all the persecution that they had to endure, having their faith essentially crushed and stamped out. And a lot of the history written about that time period describes the Reformation as this uprising by discontented masses who threw off the yoke of an oppressive, corrupt Catholic Church. You kind of see that portrayal in films like Elizabeth with Cate Blanchett, where the Catholic Church is shown to be just corrupt through and through. Yes. And this was kind of the sort of accepted understanding in England for a long time, until about the early 20th century. You had people like Hilaire Belloc start, challenging this understanding of history, saying, no, this was really just a very corrupt sort of the dissolution of the monasteries, which we can talk about a little bit later. This was nothing but a land grab by this megalomaniac king. And you've got more recently scholars like Eamon Duffy also talking about going back and sort of doing more research and showing that things are not how they have been portrayed for a long time. So when you were doing sort of research into this period, do you still think that view prevails, the sort of anti-Catholic, anti-church view of that time period?
It is an underlying view that I have run across, whether it's from reviewers or readers, but at the same time, there are some readers who are excited by this point of view. It makes sense to them, and it motivates them to think about it and to read more. I actually found Eamon Duffy's work a huge turning point for me, because I was reading a lot of biographies, and almost all of the biographies of this period are written from a pro-Anne Boleyn point of view, that she was a Protestant heroine. And it was very hard to find other points of view, and yet, as you say, the land grab, the more I looked into it, and I didn't go into these books with a axe to grind of any kind. I did my own research, and I have a magazine and before that journalistic background, and I feel very confident that through these books, I portray a world that I feel was accurate, that there was a genuine need being met by the traditional faith of the time, and that the reason for the dissolution was a need for money.
Yeah.
I mean, when you say you're going to reform a system of living, thousands of people, there are about 1,100 sisters, many more monks and friars. You're saying you're going to reform all these houses, and you send your people in, and you find 100% deep corruption. It beggars belief. And also, there was a very popular movement, the Pilgrimage of Grace, against this. So, and there were people who martyred themselves through the whole way. There was actually strong opposition, but of course Henry VIII was not good with opposition, and he directed, he or Thomas Cromwell, savage punishment of those who opposed them, some of which is depicted in my novels. And so there was so much intimidation that the priories and abbeys, they quote-unquote surrendered because of the examples of those who had tried to stand up to them. They were mostly just murdered. Some were starved or tortured before they were murdered. So you really can't blame people for taking their pensions and, leaving. That was a terrible choice.
Sure. Yeah, it was a time of just tremendous suffering. I mean, I think more than 800 monasteries and religious houses were just closed and shut and pillaged and plundered. And so many people, so many of these nuns and monks were just driven out. driven out with really no place to go. It's a
One of
tremendous
the
amount of suffering.
Right. One of the sensitive issues is what did happen to them. And of course, the people who write about the Reformation from the Protestant point of view, they don't want to think about that too much. But there is some thinking that some of these people became homeless. Some may even have starved to death. It was a time, once you got into the reign of Henry's son, Edward VI, who was even a stronger Protestant, there was poverty in the country increasing every year anyway. So it was very hard for them. But what I found in the Dartford Priory, the Dominican order that I studied, that some of the women who, it was closed in about 1538, they all had to go. Some of them stayed together in small communities because they wanted to keep observing their vows. They wanted to keep going on their own. And then when Mary I became queen, the Dominican order of nuns was one of the orders that she brought back. So they actually moved back into their new building for a number of years, not very many. I think that's amazing that for this number of years, people like to think that once they were released, that must have been great. Then they could get married and have real lives. But instead, the small groups of women lived in a community determined to keep going as best they could on their own.
Yeah, because they were convinced that's their vocation. That
yes,
was their calling.
They didn't want to give it up.
Right. And there's no doubt that Cromwell, who was sort of the henchman and helped carry out this, shutting these monasteries and taking their things and, recording their alleged crimes and misdeeds that justified their seizure of their land. It's no doubt that he lied in many cases. And I know that, for instance, claims that some of these monasteries were dissolute and then the people, some of them, the nuns were living as prostitutes or, sexually promiscuous. I have no doubt many of those were just lies. It's interesting. I actually studied at Oxford, and we would kind of go through this field and pass these monastic ruins that used to be an abbey for nuns. And what I was always told, and according to the legend, is that this was one of the monasteries that was dissolved during Reformation England, and the reason it was shut down was because the nuns were running it as a brothel. And at the time, I just believed it. I thought, horrible Catholics. I wasn't a Catholic at the time. I was a Protestant. I thought, sure, of course, those horrible, corrupt Catholics. Of course they did that. But now, as a Catholic, I look back and I think this is probably just another one of those lies concocted by Cromwell in order to seize this monastery in all its riches.
Some of the stories are very difficult to read about the nuns and the abbots, the people who tried to resist. They did this as best as they could. There was one prioress, not at Dartford, who just kept saying there is no corruption here, there are no problems here, and they actually couldn't prove them. So they just put extreme pressure on her until they basically broke her down. And they then tossed her out, put another woman in there for about 2 months, during which time they closed it. And then the woman who had been the prioress for 2 months was given a pension. The first woman who'd been there for about 20 years got no money, and then she died shortly afterward. So you see, there's the grand stories of well-known martyrdom, Cardinal Fisher, Sir Thomas More, but there's the smaller stories, too, of people really struggling and fighting to keep with what they felt was right, and it was pretty much impossible. Yeah.
Now, let's turn for a moment to your own religious background. Did that inform the writing of this series for you?
Well, my own story is rather unusual in that my mother was brought up a Catholic. She left the church about the time she got married, and my father was from an evangelical Protestant home, and he also left. So that was something they had in common. And I was brought up a Unitarian, but we didn't even do that very much. And so then when I was 19, my mother's mother was dying, my grandmother, and she told my mother when Nancy, that's me, was a baby and we were babysitting her, we had her baptized as a Catholic. And we didn't tell you because we knew that you wouldn't let us do it. This was in Chicago and they were babysitting me. And in fact, I got a couple more details that they took me to their parish priest one night when they were babysitting, and he said, I won't do this without the permission of the actual parents. So they went home. And then the next time they were babysitting, they went out and they found an older priest who said he would do it. So I found this out when I was 19, and I really was stunned.
Wow.
Now, at the same time, my sister and I, we've talked about it, we both felt there was something lacking in having no spiritual sense to our home. It was kind of sad. And my sister is now very devout. It's interesting that we both turned back to what our grandparents were doing rather than our parents. I mean, my sister's actually learning Latin.
Oh, good.
I know, my hat's off. So what I have to wonder if my choice to write about a nun was informed by my curiosity and my sort of longing for a world that I hadn't known that I was even a part of. Even though I wasn't a full part of it because I was just baptized when I was a few months old, but still, it was something very, I want to use the word alluring, very interesting. I started to go, here in New York City, you have some amazing, St. Patrick's and all these different places. I started to just go in and wonder, am I supposed to be here? And I think it did inform the books, but also I went into them accepting the common view, though. And it was only the research that made me completely upend everything that I thought going in and write a rather original view. And I've sometimes come across some people who just don't agree, and perhaps they think a nun won't be that interesting. But I've also, like I said, I've found a lot of readers who've been very excited. And I have an English friend who lives in America who read the first book, before it was published. And she said, I just love to read about this from the viewpoint of the losers. Well, yes. But even before the books are published in England too. And when I had a different publisher, and my editor at the time took me, when I visited England, she said, I'd like to take you to the theater, which was very exciting. And she said, we can go to Faust or Anne Boleyn at the Globe Theater. And I thought, well, I'd rather actually see Faust, but it seems like Anne Boleyn is more appropriate.
Yeah.
So I went with her to the production. But then while I was sitting there, I just felt like I just really didn't agree with a lot of what was happening. Of course, I didn't say anything. I just sat there. But there were a lot of jokes about corrupt monks and references to Thomas More, the torturer. And everybody in the theater was nodding and smiling. And I thought, ugh, I just don't agree with this. But, you see it again in Wolf Hall, the same thing. So it's rather difficult to be swimming against the stream, but I don't regret it for a minute.
Sure. And so your parents are still not practicing then?
No. My father passed away, and my mother is not. No. Although they don't. She finds it kind of puzzling, I think, especially with my sister. But they don't. They didn't try to stop us. I just think that, I don't know, I've heard that actually that is not the only, there are other cases of, my grandparents were Irish American, I don't know if it's an Irish thing, of grandparents secretly baptizing the infants without the parents knowing, because they just felt like they couldn't live with themselves if they didn't get a shot.
Well, God bless your grandparents.
Yeah, they really loved me.
That's wonderful. So, how have your books been received by fellow writers of historical fiction? Have they been well received? Have people been critical?
They have been well received. I have gotten a couple of awards, which is fun. And the first book was an Oprah pick, which is great. But to my delight, it made the finalist list for the Ellis Peters Historical Dagger, which is an award from the Crime Writers Association of England, because I love those Brother Cadfael books, which Ellis Peters wrote. I mean, my books are different in the Brother Cadfael books, which are written during the reign of Stephen and Matilda, much earlier. He solves a murder mystery in every book, much like a Poirot. My nun is not running around solving who killed this person who we found in the priory. They're more thrillers, suspense-driven stories, more historical novels. But I love those. I love Derek Jacobi, his Brother Cadfael, and so that was great. And so, other than that, the only problem that I've had is especially in England, that the newspapers are, they just didn't want to review the books. It's not like I was told that. I was never overtly told it was because they were the Catholic point of view. It was more I was an American, frankly. I was told by the publicist that some of the newspapers in England don't really know quite what to make of Americans writing about English history, although it's pretty common. Yeah. They don't think it's cool, maybe. But I have had a couple people say that they prefer Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall series to mine. We're different. We've taken a much different point of view. We're different kinds of writers. She's very accomplished, and I take my hat off to her. Sure. But I just have a far different perspective on what happened during that time.
Right. So can we expect any more books from you in this series, or are you going to be heading in a different direction?
No, I'm gonna do what they call a standalone next, which is a book set in history, but not during the Tudor period. And then after that, I think I might return. I have ideas so much happened to the nuns and friars of that time period that there's so much rich material for me to work with. Sure. I really want to get back in there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I bet it's a lot of fun to do the research and the writing for this.
Oh, to me, research, there are some thriller writers who are chastised because they don't do enough research, and they say, I'm on contract, I have to go really fast. I do some research, but I'm really about the story. And you can see that for them, the research is slowing them down, while for me, research is a treat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm a real history nerd. I can't get enough of the research.
Oh, I'm the same way. I love research. Yeah.
Oh, it's fun.
Yeah. All right. So please tell our listeners where they can learn more about you online and how to order your books.
Well, my website is www.nancybilyeau.com. And my name is Nancy with a Y, and then Bilyeau, BILYEAU.com. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at TutorScribe, and I have about 7,000 followers. I really love Twitter, and I have a lot of like-minded history people there. And also, my books are on Amazon. They're Barnes & Noble. You can order them through either of those, and they're at some bookstores, independent bookstores as well. But the easiest thing probably is to go to the website or just to go to Amazon. Excellent. They're Kindle, hardcover, paperback, audio. Simon & Schuster does it all.
Excellent. All right. Today, again, we've been talking with Nancy Bilyeau. The title of her books are The Crown, The Chalice, and The Tapestry. So, Nancy, it was wonderful talking with you today. Thanks for spending the time, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. This was a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Great. All right, everybody, thank you for listening, and you can find an archive of all my interviews, more than 80, at forwardboldly.com. Signing off, I'm Christine Niles, and in the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly.